Hey everyone. How's it going? So welcome to the live workshop. As always, yeah, we're gonna give a minute or two for everybody to join in, make sure that everybody's set to kind of participate and see what we can do here and what we can hear here, right? Make sure you have a drink, coffee, tea, water, whatever you prefer, and we're gonna start in like a minute or so. So until then, we gotta somehow manage the time. So where are you guys from? Have you already started to work on the actual report? Do you have any particular questions? And how are you doing in general? Hi there. Hi, Venugopal. Hey, David. So, guys, have you already started to work on the dataset? Or just waiting for the workshop and then gonna jump into it? All right. Well, I guess we can slowly get started, right? So what's on the agenda for today? So for today, one of the main things that we're always going to be doing is we're going to be talking about the dataset. That's the primary goal. And the second thing is we're also going to be talking about some of the visuals and what type of visuals could be applicable here, what sort of ideas could be resolved here. Because one of the things I always try to reiterate and kind of remind to you guys is remember that the data set that we give to you is the base, right? You can enhance this data set with other dimensions if you want to, as long as it keeps making sense, right? So don't just add random themes just because. Make sure that it still is able to tell some sort of a story. So that's one part of it. As far as what needs to be answered with the report, if there isn't anything in particular that we said this must be done, it's completely up for interpretation. So if you want to focus, let's say in this data set, if you want to focus just on the supplier chain, you can focus on that. If you want to focus on the actual suppliers, you can focus on that. It's completely up to you on how you want to try to tackle this. So message from minors. I'm a newbie and just look data, made decision with workshop, and then yeah, that's not a bad approach as well. But yeah, the agenda for the workshop is we're going to talk about the data set, then we're going to talk about some of the visuals, like I said, and we can also talk about some of the best practices, what to take into consideration. And of course, there's going to be a Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, do not hesitate to ask them. And one thing that I'm a firm believer of, there's no such thing as stupid questions, right? If you have something, ask. That's why I'm here. That's why you have this ability to ask the questions. You don't have to worry about it. If you still feel shy about it, I understand it. I was the same way when I started off with Power BI. You can reach out to us privately with sending a message to the email of webinars@zoomcharts.com. So somebody from the team is probably going to post it in the chat as well, so you can have the ability to just copy it. So that's one way of how to reach out. The other thing is do not forget that you have the ability of just signing up for one-on-one sessions. So for example, if we go to the challenge page, you actually have the ability to book a meeting with me and we can discuss these things separately as well. So there are multiple ways on how you can reach out to us. Ask questions, don't be afraid about it. It's a lot better to ask a question and, for example, worst case scenario, you don't get an answer rather than you just don't know what to do, you didn't ask the question and you're just stuck there, right? So make sure that you, for example, just go for it. There's nothing to lose, right? All right, there we go. We had a comment just popped off. So any questions, reach out to webinars@zoomcharts.com. And that comes for everything regarding the data set, regarding the challenge itself, regarding the submissions, anything, you can always reach out to our team directly. All right, so first things first, let's quickly add the data set and take a closer look at it and what it has to offer. So let's go to desktop, Onyx Day Dem. This one's November. Let's open it up. Let's go for the table. And as always, instead of just loading it in, I'm always opening up in Power Query because I want to take a look at the data itself. I just want to qualify it quickly, understand if everything's correctly done here. Okay, so going through the columns, one of the things that is happening here, for example, we can see that price is actually identified as a text. So one thing to make sure whenever you're looking at a data set is make sure you try to understand what is going to be the type of that particular column, right? Whether it's a text, whether it's a number, whether it's a fixed decimal number, just a regular decimal number, a date, whatever it is, it's always better to have set a particular type of data rather than just to keep it in general. And what I mean by general, let's see if one of the columns maybe, we don't have one straight away, but let's try to create one. So this is a step you don't have to do. I just want to quickly try to emulate something. So let's say if the defect rate is going to be greater. Okay, so this is also detected as text. All right, let's go like this. So if the product type is going to be, I can see here, hair care, then I want it to be 1-3. If it's going to be equal to skincare, I want it to be ABC. Nothing. Right? The reason why I wanted to create this column is, see, yeah, there we go. So one of the things that might happen sometimes when you open up a sample or just a regular data set that hasn't predefined column types, this is one of the types that you might come across, and this is called general. The one thing you want to avoid as much as possible is to not have these, or to have these, probably to avoid having these. The reason for this is because what this means is that Power BI essentially wasn't able to fully detect what is going to be the type of the column, because it sees some text, it sometimes sees values, so it just gave it an undefined basically data type. The reason why this is something that might come across as an issue afterwards is because on initial glance, when you make very basic visuals, it's not an issue whatsoever. The main point when this becomes an issue is going to be when you start to create measures. Because when you're creating measures, for example, in DAX itself, you need to define what you're comparing against. And if you don't have a data type set, you might come across errors where DAX just tells you, hey, I cannot compare, for example, text versus a number versus a text, or integer, or whatever it is, right? So there might be possibilities for these sort of errors. The other thing is that Power BI sometimes is not going to be able to properly parse the DAX. In those cases where you, for example, say that, hey, if this column is higher, for example, bigger than 10, Power BI is going to say, well, that column is in general, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to pass all the numbers, so it's going to give you that the data type is incorrect. So if you ever see ABC123 as a data type, it's an undefined column that is currently being associated with general, then this needs to be adjusted. So never keep these. Yeah, just a small little tip. What else? For these ones, price. So the issue why I'm having, or sort of the issue that I'm having here is you can see that this is identified as a text. And if I try to convert this as a decimal number, what's going to happen is, yep, replace current step. I do this purposely, and you can see I get an error. Now, the reason why I'm getting an error is because of the locality of the data set. So the data itself, the data set has been prepared in a locality that's different from mine. So what happens is that the limiters in the values are different between different regions, right? We all know this, especially this is noticeable with dates, right? We all know different countries do dating systems differently. Some start with the date itself and then month. US, for example, starts with month and then date. So that's one part. The same goes for thousand separators, the comma, the sort of decimal separators. There's different things that change from region to region. So in my case, the reason why this is throwing out an error is because you have 69.80, right? In Latvia, sorry about that, guys. Our decimal number separator is a comma. So this needs to be switched up. Now there are two ways on how this could be done. I could go the route of selecting, for example, replace values, and just physically, I can actually show you. Say that I want to change the dot to comma, replace it, And now if I try to switch to decimal number, you can see it works properly as well. So that's one way on how this could be handled. But those are two steps that I'm doing here. Alternatively, another thing that you can do is if you know that the original column is in the correct format, is just a locality issue, you can do the following. You can right click on a column, change type using locale, then choose, of course, the data type that you're going to be converting. So I'm going to be going for, this is price. So price is usually fixed decimal numbers because you typically have two decimal numbers there. And then the second thing you need to provide is the locale. And the most important thing to remember here is, read this, it says sample input values. So instead of saying to which locale you want to convert things, you need to showcase the value original format, where it's coming from, because everything else is going to be done through the Power BI settings. So in this case, this is English United States. So I'm just going to find English United States, press OK. And you can see it did the same thing. And I also now have only two decimal places. So I didn't have to replace, Power BI did it for me. It just basically converted the model for this particular column. And this is what you can do also with date columns as well. Same principle, change the data type and adjust the data formats and everything. So what I'm gonna be doing is, actually I can see that I accidentally removed the step where it automatically detected the data type. So I don't want to change all the columns again. So I'm just gonna quickly connect again to the Excel file and adjust only some of the columns. This is why you got to be careful in Power Query. Remember, in Power Query, you don't have undo or Control Z, right? Every single step is basically saved as a step. And if you delete one, well, it's no longer there. You can't reverse that action. So this one's text, right? This one's going to be a decimal number. Okay. Let's see if anything else. This is going to be a decimal number. Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern. What else? These are whole numbers. That's good. There we go. Holding down Control, just selecting multiple ones. This is going to be a decimal. This is going to be a decimal. Let's see. Manufacturing costs, defect rates, and costs. So all of these are going to be fixed decimals. I'm okay with just having two decimal numbers. If you want to have more, you can, of course, just go with regular decimal numbers. I'm going to be sticking to two decimals. And the locality is English United States. There we go. All right, let's go through the rest. Text. That's good now. Inspection results. That's good. That's all good. Seems okay. Okay. Yeah, seems good now. All right, so once you've done that initial profiling, the other thing that I've already mentioned in previous webinars, but one thing that definitely helped me, especially when I started off, is this column quality. Column quality is basically these three properties. It tells you whether the values in a column are valid, or they give out an error, or they're just simply empty. It allows you to do a quick analysis of the columns. But one thing to know there is these percentages are always going to be whole. So for example, if you have like a 100,000 rows and you have an error in two of them, it's not going to be 1%, right? So it's still going to showcase as 0%. So if you want to get a full view of it, hover over that block and it's going to tell you right here the number and in the brackets the percentage. So sometimes you might notice that you have like one or two errors and you can't really find them. So this is one of the ways in how you can do this. Alternatively, another thing that you can do is you can enable column profiles. So column profiles, what they do is if you click on a column, it opens up this part right here. It shows you some basic statistics about the column, the count, the unique values, the min max value, depending on what the column is, right? And the value distribution. So these things kind of help you out to quickly understand what the data set is about initially, even before going to the Power BI desktop side and starting to play around with the visuals and everything, right? So this is one of the things that you can easily do. All right, for now, it seems like it's okay. Now, let's close it. Apply the query. And we can see that the data set itself is not very big. There's like 100 rows only, so that should be good. All right, so the one thing we can notice from the data is we have a lot of different values, and we have few different dimensions that we could essentially analyze. We could go for customer demographics, inspection results, location, product types, routes, shipping carriers, SKU are unique product codes, supplier keeping unit, I think that was the abbreviation, supplier name, transportation mode. So different sort of dimensions we have and different values we have. Now, when I was looking at the data set, one of the things that I wanted to see, first of all, is I just wanted to see if there's any direct correlation between different properties. And one of the things that allows me to do this is I can essentially do the following. I can go ahead and say that, hey, I want to see if the defect rate, which is going to be on the x-axis, has a direct correlation with production volumes. So the more I produce, the higher the chance of defects. I want to split it by the lowest level, which is going to be the SKU, so individual product codes. So this allows me to, for example, say it this way. This is the production volume. This is the amount of defects. For me personally, I want the defects to be on the y-axis. So the higher it is, the higher the probability that there's going to be a defect. That's just me. You can put these axes however you want, but that's just my logic here. And for the scatter plot, there are a few things that I wanted to do. Of course, what it allows me to basically do is, right, if we go for formatting options and enable a regression line, we can see that there's sort of a direct relationship between this, right? The more I produce, the higher chance of a defect, right? That's what you would expect. But we can also see that there are a couple of outliers here. So for example, if we look at right here, we can see that the product code with the ID of 42, even though it was only produced 179 times, the defect rate was 4.94. And you can see where I did a mistake. I converted all of these to fixed decimal numbers. Fixed decimal numbers by default are considered to be a currency. So now the defect rate is 4 euros and 94 cents. So what I'm going to quickly do is defect rate and just switch it from fixed decimals to regular decimal numbers. I just don't want my users to be confused, right? So right here as well, once we changed it, let's just allow the visual to update the value. Oh, formatting, forgot that. General. Still gonna be stubborn? Yeah, okay. Let's see. Okay, let's try reloading it. What is the euro there? Even though it's not physically there anymore. So that's the defect, right? Okay. Okay, I'll look at it later. For whatever reason, it's there. All right, but what I wanted to do with the scatter plot is understanding that there are certain sort of thresholds. I want to highlight to the end user that there are basically different areas where these could be segregated. That's one thing, and the other thing is I want to look at these based on a supplier. So for example, what I could do is in the legend block, I can just simply add in a supplier name. And that allows me to quickly see that, for example, yeah, I'm going to also enable a legend because by default it is not enabled, so I can play around with it. I'm going to put it at the top and in the center. There we go. So what this allows me to do now is we can see that this particular product is coming from supplier 5. So the product with the highest probability of having a defect with the lowest amount of almost being ever produced. What I want to do is I just want to focus on supplier 5. So I can do this in a few ways. I could theoretically use for example, legends to disable everything else. Or since I know this information now, I could also go ahead and say that, hey, I actually want to see, let's say, a donut chart that has these supplier names based on revenue generated. There we go. And supplier is going to be the pink color. So I select supplier 5 And now I'm looking at just products for supplier 5. And I can see that actually he has a lot of products that fall into, I would say, a high risk probability of having a defect, right? We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of X amount of products. That's something we could calculate, but out of X amount of products, 50% of them almost, or even more, yeah, more than 50% of them are with high probability of having a defect. So that's something I could investigate. And that's one of the angles that I could essentially try to analyze a bit deeper with additional cards, with additional KPIs. There are different ways on how you can handle this. Now, as far as this visual goes, there are a few other things that we could do here. So for example, if we look at the chart right now, we are seeing that the sort of the data points are colored based on the supplier, which is good. But if you have a lot of different suppliers, well, it's going to look like a messy rainbow, right? There's just going to be colors all over the place, so it's going to be hard to focus on things. But if it's something that you need, you can keep that. Alternatively, what I want to tell to the user is for him to very quickly understand which of these data points are in a good area, bad area, or okay, we're kind of handling this, but it's not yet too bad. So one way on how we could do this is by going into the formatting options and going through thresholds. So for the thresholds, you actually have the ability to also set it as an area. And for the area, I'm going to say that everything starting from 0 up until 1 is going to be in a green color. So let's go ahead, say that this is green. The line color is also going to be green. So that's my first area. Then I'm going to enable another threshold, which is also going to be an area. And this is going to go from 1 up until 3. And this is going to be an orange or yellow, the typical sort of traffic light, right? Green, yellow, red. Then I'm also going to enable the third one. And I'm going to say that 3 up until. We could go for a fixed value, or we can also just say that I don't know exactly how high it's going to be, but basically I know that if it goes above 5, I want to make sure that it's going to be in the red zone. So I'm just going to put in 100. You could theoretically just, add 9 nines, and that's sufficient in most cases, but it really just depends on the case. But the reason why this was important to me is because purely visually, by looking at it now, I think you're going to agree with me that this allows you guys to a lot faster define that there's these sort of areas of these points, right? You could, of course, I could tell you that there's a threshold starting from 3, but then you have to find 3, identify it, then visually kind of create a line and understand that we're talking about this area. So it takes a lot of processing time even for just, a regular person. So having thresholds allows to avoid this, and you're just putting this in front of the customer. Now, what's the benefit of this is because if I want to, for example, focus on those points which are in this segment, I can just do a rectangular selection and use this as a cross filter for everything else. So that's one of the things that you kind of can think about and sort of implement here. Now, this is one part of how things could be done. Alternatively, there are different ways on how this could be done in for example, a different approach. And I'm going to do it through the Power Query. And what I want to do here is essentially, instead of creating those thresholds, because theoretically it's something that allows you to very quickly and sort of differentiate your views, right? What I want to do is I want to be able to change the color of the node based on the bucket where they fall in. So I'm going to do this in a very basic approach. You could do this also through DAX. It's not that it's impossible. I just usually like to cover different approaches. So today we're going to be focusing on Power Query a bit more. So that's it. I'm going to create a conditional column. And I'm going to say that this is going to be the defect group. And I'm going to find there's going to be 3 rules. I'm also going to have not specified, which is going to be black. And I'm going to say that these rules are basically the following. So if the defect rate is greater or equal to 3, this is going to be in the red zone. So these are with high probability. If the defect rate is greater than or equal to 1, that's in orange. If it's greater or equal to 0, because we know that defects cannot be negative. So if it's above 0 or equal to 0, but lower than 1, then this is going to be in green. And why do I always make sure that I add this clause is because if anything falls outside of the boundaries of the rules that I set, I want to be able to find it. So having these unique values allows you to find it afterwards a lot faster. Because when you have a blank or a zero, for example, a null, it's a lot easier to avoid it in the charts. Because for some charts, you might have said that none showcase blank values, so it's just going to be keeping ignored. So this is one way on how to handle these sort of approaches. So once I have this, again, remember, double check the data type. I'm going to make sure that this is being set to text. There we go. So once you do that, what I can do is find the defect group, add it to my marker colors, because these are color names, right? Red, green, orange. We can see I added it here, nothing changed straight away. That's because I need to go to data points defaults and change the coloring mode to dynamic. So this helps me to, for example, completely eliminate the necessity of thresholds, because now the data points are in that particular color. And these sort of rules or, let's say, areas, they can also be dynamic through measures. Like I said, I just made it very simply through the conditional columns because you don't always necessarily have to create complex things. They can be relatively simple as well. It all just depends on the use case and what you're trying to do there. So this is one of the approaches. Now, which one is better? It definitely depends on who you're presenting to and how they're going to be utilizing the story afterwards. Because, for example, one issue with this approach is even though I like it better than the thresholds, purely visually, right? It allows me to focus a lot better. But at the same time, at this point, the suppliers become sort of obsolete in a sense, because I don't know which supplier is where. But at the same time, it was really hard for me to still kind of group the suppliers there. But what's the benefit here is that I can still, for example, select a supplier from an external visual and have the same logic for the coloring in those thresholds. So it just depends on how you're going to be utilizing the report as whole, right? Don't think about a single visual as an instance by itself. Think about the visual as an instance in a sense that it allows you to define what exactly you want to do with it, but it's not going to be the only thing in a report. You always have to consider what's also going to be around you. What are going to be the cards showing? What are going to be other visuals? How do you want this visual to affect other visuals? How the other visuals are going to affect this visual? So play around with these things. I know it sounds like it's a lot of thinking to do, and it's a lot of sort of processes that you have to go through. It's what it is, guys. Nobody said that this is going to be super easy. It's annoying. Trust me. I've done it too many times to think that this is enjoyable sometimes. No, it's sometimes annoying, but it's something that we have to do. Because as soon as you take that out of equation and don't think about that stuff, it's very easy to break your reports. Right? We forget about some sort of connection between two different visuals. So selecting one single point in another visual just breaks suddenly everything. So think about those cross chart interactions and different ways on how to handle these things. So that's for the scatter plot. What else we could do here, for example, is, of course, I don't know, if you want to add additional values, you could add them in the tooltip if it's necessary. So for example, you want to know the location where the supplier is from. So we can go right here, tooltips, remove the first because we don't need that. So now we can see that location is Bangalore. Now, once we have that location, naturally, I want to see where it is on the map. So what I'm going to do is use the latitude and longitude. The value that you want to use here is completely up to you. That's your choice. I'm going to stick to the same, for example, revenue generated. There we go. So if we click on this point, we can see that it's in the southern south of India. If we deselect it and if we zoom in a bit closer, we can see that there's actually two different points here. So one thing that you could always play around with is choosing whether or not you want to cluster the nodes. That's one, of course. Because right now, when I'm using the clustering, it kind of takes away from the full story. So I could do this, for example, right? I'm quickly gonna apply a custom theme. Just bear with me, guys. The reason why I'm doing this is I just want to make sure that you don't get the license logo popping off every single time. There we go. All right. So you can see that, for example, I can always have to reshift my focus because these points are being held in different positions, right? So that's one of the things. So having a node cluster is one thing that you can consider to have it enabled or disabled. The reason why I still would want to have it enabled is because of this, right? If I have clusters enabled, I can use the pie charts and nodes. The pie charts and nodes can again go back to the same thing that we're analyzing in this, and that would be that the category is the supplier. So you can kind of see a trend that's happening, right? I'm focusing on supplier as the main thing to analyze. So we can see that the suppliers are going right here. We can straight away see one of the formatting issues, that one of the default colors is being used as a center, the same as the slice color. So I'm just going to adjust that color to something more neutral, for example, something gray. Always make sure that you double check the colors. Don't trust that Power BI is going to automatically do the right thing. Power BI just follows a simple logic. You have a color palette and it follows the color palette. It doesn't necessarily think about, okay, this is going to be a better color for that, right? No, it's a very basic approach there. So think about that. All right, so if we have these, I still have one issue, and that is that on the initial view, for example, if we do something like this, you can see that first of all, these are kind of close to the edges, and in some cases, these are going to be overlapping. Or in this case, actually, the map is fine. So what I'm going to do is goes to the base layer, and for the base layer, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to save a particular position that I wanted to open up every single time I view the report. And I think it's going to be this. Okay, that's going to be the zoom level. Now I'm going to adjust the visual itself. So I'm going to say that the clustering distance is going to be lower because I wanted to split these two. That's fine. So the max radius, the nodes are too big. So I'm going to go for something like 15. And then the min, 8. They kind of overlap a bit still. Let's say 5. Yeah, it's either this or go with something like this, 10 and 15, for example, or even 20. But then you understand that these are going to be overlapping, right? Play around with these ideas, play around with the visuals. Don't be afraid to just see what you can do with it. You don't always have to go with just the default routes. No, you're okay with playing around. That's why we kind of encourage you to do this. For, let's say, if I make the visual a little bit more vertical, then I can zoom in a bit more. I could focus just on the data, but then I feel kind of bad for cutting off a bit of southern India. So I'll keep it like this and just lower the size of the visual and allow the user to still zoom in if it's necessary, but the default view is going to be this, right? Okay, so we have the scatter plot. We have the supplier names. We're focusing on revenue generated and the suppliers itself. Like there are other dimensions, of course. I could go ahead and say that, okay, supplier name, what's going to be next one? I'm going to actually go for, I don't know, location, for example, where all the suppliers are in the same location. Let's see. No. So I can go for one supplier. I can go for a deeper dive into a particular location. So you can always set up multiple layers and multiple dimensions that you can essentially have there. So that's one thing. The other thing that when I was looking at a data set, I thought could be an interesting approach here is to play around with a top number of things, right? So for example, one thing that we could do is, let's say, focus only on the top 10 products and see what's their defect rate, where they're coming from, who's the supplier, and so forth. I could do this very quickly by just going into the filter panel, going on the SKU, say that I want to focus on top N. I want to see only, let's say, top 10 based on revenue generated. So these are the products that have brought in the most revenue, and that's how they look on the scatter plot when it comes to defects and production amounts. So that's one. But what I didn't like about this is that it kind of fixates me, and I don't really have flexibility of just playing around with what's going to be this number. So one thing that we can definitely do is just work around it. And in order to do that, we can just create, for example, just different measures. So we can create a ranking measure, which dynamically calculates, for example, what's going to be the rank of the particular SKU code based on whether it's total revenue generated, whether it's something else. It's completely up to you. But I'm going to stick to what I already kind of started here, and that's going to be the revenue generated. So I'm going to say total revenue. And I'm just summing up the revenue generated column. So that's one part of it. Sorry guys, just a second. All right, getting back to it. So total revenue is sum of table 1 revenue generated. Now I want to create a ranking mechanism. So I'm going to say that this is a rank for suppliers. Again, I'm focusing, sorry, not suppliers, but SKU. I'm focusing on the product itself and then everything sliced and diced by supplier and other dimensions if I want to. So rank for SKU. And this one's going to be a rankx function. And what I want to do is I want to look at all table 1. And the ranking is going to be based on, we called it total revenue. That we can skip, so we don't always have to place in a variable, and keep it dense. Okay, let's just see if it's working now. Again, one thing that I can't say enough is when you're building things, don't be afraid to have multiple pages. Don't just delete straight away things or try to fit everything in one page. That's why you have a report. This is your playing ground. So where are we? SKU, total revenue. I'm just going to make the total revenue also look a bit nicer and say that this is only going to have 2 decimals. Did I not do it? 2 decimals. There we go. Looks nicer. Yeah, they have some decimals. Perfect. Now, rank for SKU. And just let's see. If we sort things based on the revenue, we can see that we now have a rank. Right? Perfection. So, next one is I want to make sure that I somehow can control what is going to be the total amount that I'm looking for, right? So which SKU codes I'm trying to find. So one way on how this can be done is by creating another measure. We're going to call it top n SKUs by rank. And in this case, we're going to go with an if statement. And the if statement is going to be for rank for SKU. And then if it's lower or equal to oh no, actually, if this is lower or equal to wrong one, lower or equal to, let's say 5, then I'm gonna see the actual total revenue. Otherwise, I want to see a blank. So what this allows me to do is have it here. Again, adjust your formattings, double check them always. So now what this allows me to do is, for example, manually adjust and say, okay, I want to look at top 5, top 10, and so forth, right? But I get the results only for these. Now, of course, how to avoid kind of having them here, because I don't even have them, is I could say that, again, through the filter cards is don't showcase anything that is showcase only non-blank ones. So there we go. So now by quickly adjusting this number, for example, this one recalculates and readjusts how much it needs to show. Okay, so that's all good. But now what I want to do is make sure that the user can also choose how many of those values he wants to see in a report. So what I'm going to be doing is we're also going to be creating, not a measure, sorry, we're going to be going for a parameter. And a parameter is going to be a numeric range. So we're going to call this top n SKUs. It's going to be a whole number. We have in total 100, but this of course doesn't mean that you have to go for all products. This is just for the range that you're allowing to do. I'm allowing all of them. The minimum is going to be 1. You can't have no, right? And the increment is going to be 1, and we're going to start off with, I don't know, let's say 10. You can leave this on or you can exclude it. I'm going to keep it on. Click on create. And let's say drag it back to 10, or actually let's go for something like 15. So the reason why I'm doing this is because what this allows me to do is then afterwards find the total SKU by rank. And instead of this 10, remember, which we manually set, I can just say that this is going to be using total SKU value, which is coming from parameter. So total, what's it called? Oh, top n, sorry, top n SKU value. There we go. And since I already said that this has to be filtered by non-blank values, what this allows me to do is just dynamically adjust this, and the table is going to adjust accordingly, right? So I'm giving just a little bit more flexibility to the users. Now, if we go back to page 1, I want to implement the ability for users to define how many of these they see in the scatter plot. So if I just add a regular slicer, I go for top and SKU. There we go. I start sliding it, but nothing happens. So the reason why nothing happens here is because one of the properties that is directly connected to is this one, right? The top end SKUs, the actual total value. We need to somehow put it in a visual so that there is a relationship between these two. So what I can do is I can add it to the value label in the scatter plot. And right now you can still see it's not fully taken effect. Well, it's not fully taken effect because right now through the filters I haven't filtered anything out. So it means that even though some of these nodes don't have the value for it, so for example, if I go for something like 8, you can see that most of them don't even have that total, right? Some of them are going to have it, but I don't know exactly which one, so it's kind of hard to say. Yeah, I can't find anyone, but still. So it's not taking this into account. So what I need to do is through the filter panel, go ahead and say that top SKUs by rank is not blank. Once I do this, you can see that this also allows me to dynamically adjust how many data points I see on the scatter plot. And based on that, I can do some further analysis. So I can even go, for example, I want to focus on, let's say, these two suppliers. I can keep it at 100, so this means I'm looking at all their data points because I don't know exactly how much are there going to be. And then afterwards say, okay, I only want to focus on the top 10 products from these two suppliers. Now, why this might happen in some cases is where you physically don't have 10 data points is because of the ranking. So ranking has two different variations. It has a skip or a dance mechanism. So what it means is if you have a draw, what happens with the additional values, right? So adjusting that would allow me to get more values here. But this is the basic approach. You have the ability to define the top ranking. And of course, one thing that we could also do is from the filter itself exclude, let's say, the supplier. So it's always trying to find the top or include this as a filter. There are different ways on how this can be handled. But I wanted to do this to kind of have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to seeing how much information you're looking at it. And an interesting approach that you can take or sort of try to analyze here even further on is, for example, to look at, okay, let's say I want to look at the top 10, right? So this is how the top 10 looks like. Now, when it comes to the cards, because currently you can see I have no cards whatsoever, I could go for basically a view selection versus the grand total, where in one side I have cards that showcase the grand total, which means that they don't care about any applied filters, they're just showcasing you the total. Whereas on the other hand, you're focusing on that selection that you have created based on your visuals. So I'm looking at the top 10, so it's only looking at top 10 products, the total revenue generated by them, and so forth, the average time to deliver, and so forth. And in between, I could create a comparison. So if you're looking at top 10, how much does it contribute, for example, to the whole total? Like, for example, does the top 10 mean that this is what's bringing in like 20% of the whole revenue? Or is it only like a marginal 10, or just let's say 1, 2, 3% of the grand total? Or you can compare, for example, the averages. So the average, let's say, defect count from top 10, how does it compare against the average defect count of all products together? So there are different alleys in what you can sort of try to investigate or go for, right? So it's completely up to you which one you choose. These are just some of the ideas. And this can be done in multiple dimensions as well. So I'm here focusing mostly on supplier. You could create two different dimensions where you're trying the same approach for the supplier, and the other one when you're looking at, I think the other one was, which one was it? Supplier name, transportation. No, 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 no. Am I missing it? There were two parts of the story. We're looking. Hmm. Supplier name. Okay. Or yeah, we could also go for products, for example. Products, we could do this for demographics, shipping carriers, shipping methods, locations, anything. But yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can do here. Sorry. And as far as the visuals go, I would probably say that scatterplot is one of the ones that I would recommend for this one, because there's a lot of different values that you could compare or try to find a correlation between. Since we have a location, a map is not a bad choice, but you don't have a lot of detailed views, so it might not be the best visual, but it's still an option. You can use a donut chart. Since it's a lot of categorical data, you could use either combo or combo bar. Since we don't really have a timeline, timeline is out of this challenge, I would say. If you want to add a dimension for it, go for it, but it's not provided by default. And something you could do for is a very quick idea. You could go, for example, for a network chart to showcase how things are going through the pipeline. So for example, let's say I'm a supplier. From the supplier, I want to see which route I'm taking usually. So routes, and after the routes, I want to see product types, or actually supplier product types routes. There we go, based on the same revenue generated. So this kind of allows you to create that sort of view. And remember that this view, you can always go ahead and, for example, adjust it manually, just dividing and defining where things are supposed to go. So there are different ways in how you can handle this. So something like this. Not ideal because I'm doing this in 30 seconds, right? But you get the idea. But yeah, there are different dimensions that you can essentially go through, you can look into. And the one thing that I would recommend is don't be afraid to just play around with things, right? There are inspirational materials. Yeah, you can see as well. Top left corner, you have a QR code, and you can look at different templates that have already been created. You can go through previous challenges. If somebody wants to learn more about the scatter plot, I would definitely say that I recommend looking at the announcement webinar that we had regarding the scatter plot, because it's officially live now and it's fully certified and everything's good there. So went through a lot of things and ideas and just talking about scatters in general. So that's also an interesting approach or material that you can look into. All right, I guess it's time for the Q&A. Let's see what you have. Okay, we have a question. Please explain the difference between availability and stock level. Okay, I'll be completely honest with you. When I first looked at the dataset, I had absolutely no idea what's the difference between them as well. So what I did is I did the best I could, and I went to the organizing team and I asked, where does the dataset come from? And they said that the dataset comes from Kaggle. And what I did is I just did a quick search. So I'm gonna put it right here. So what I did is I already have it here, but just to kind of give you my thought process, right? Supply chain sample data set Kaggle, and I found this one. I opened it up. I didn't know if it's gonna be the right one, but I just trusted my guts. And if you look at the column names, I was like, yeah, I've seen this somewhere before, right? So that's the same data set. So I hope that there's going to be something about the dataset section that explains the column names and everything. I was like, well, that was a bummer because there's nothing there. So I went through, well, I could go through the code, but I'm not there yet. So I went to discussions, something I can manage, and I looked if there's any discussions with more information. And thank God there was this one, need description, full forms over the columns. Open it up, and right here you can see that there's a comment that gives you the full dictionary. So this is where you can, sorry, this is where you can find it. And how I got here, like I said, look for supply chain dataset sample Kaggle, open up the first form that you find, and just open up discussions and find a discussion. I'm guessing what I'm going to be doing afterwards as well is I'm just going to give the link to the team so the team can send you the link to the Kaggle dataset and the follow-up emails as well. Or add this section right here just as a separate document, the dictionary itself. So we'll see how we can do this. But yeah, the main difference between these two, so availability and stock level. Availability informs about the product availability, whereas the stock level, the number of products still available at stock at any given time. So that's the explanation that they're giving it to us. As far as I understand this, the difference is that availability just means how much of this product is available in general. So let's say my factory can hold, not factory, but my little warehouse, my garage storage, I can hold X amount of units, but stock level means how many units I currently have in the garage. That's the way I understood it. If I misunderstood it, well, it's on me. All right, next one. Are both times and lead time columns value referred to suppliers? So let's see. Lead times, the time required in order to receive product from supplier. Lead time without the S is the time required to obtain products or materials from particular supplier. So this is when you get the fully produced product. This is how to get the raw products. Okay, next one. How can we make a dynamic X and Y axis, average and quadrant scatter plot? How can we make dynamic X and Y axis? So dynamic X and Y axis, if you mean by how do I have the ability to switch around what's going to be on the X axis and what's going to be on the Y axis, then that's just a simple use of field parameters. You can create field parameters and then allow the user to choose what's going to be on the X and what's going to be on the Y axis. Average and quadrant scatter plot. Not entirely sure what you mean by that, but if you mean by, for example, how can you have a dynamic sort of coloring based on the averages of X and Y, then one thing you could do is, so on this one, I already created it, but what I could do is, let's go ahead. So we have time. We don't have a lot of time, but just to have an idea, right? Where's the scatter plot? There we go. Let's say I'm going back again for defect rates. Production, it doesn't matter. Revenue generated as long as it's something. SKU, so I have my scatter plot now. and I have these thresholds. On the thresholds, I can say that instead of a constant, I can switch it to one of the aggregations, and these aggregations can also be lines. So this shows me the average cross point of all four of them. So these are now your quadrants. For these quadrants, if you want to color them differently, you can go ahead and enable area shadings. And the area shadings is, again, multiple set of settings that you can adjust and define where exactly it's going to be located. So combination of thresholds and area shadings, I would say, and field parameters to fully achieve, if I understood what you were looking for. Okay, next one. The different lead time mentioned dataset, are they both days or hours? Let's go with days. But I'd say in this case, since it's not defined, you can use either days or hours and it's going to be fine. There's not going to be anything held up against you because there's nothing to identify differently. So you can handle those as days or hours. Just make sure that you put it somewhere in the story that those are hours or days, so it's a little bit easier to understand. But doesn't matter which one you use. All right, next one. Manufacturing cost and shipping costs, are they per unit product or the batch of respective products? Manufacturing costs. Costs related to the product process, including raw materials, cost, labor, and so forth. Um, okay, let's take a look at a row level context. So we have a report. Let's go for one. So the price, manufacturing cost, 46. Since everything is on a row level basis and each of these is a single product, my understanding would be that this is for this batch of products. Or no, wait, number of products. So just a quick math. Yeah, I'm using my phone during a webinar, I get it, but I want to see. So 69.8 times 802. That's something different. So I'm guessing that this is on per unit. Shipping costs and everything. Manufacturing cost. Yeah, I'd say that this is on per group, not per unit. Or it's a weird combination even, it seems like. I'd say just to simplify things, you could go with the approach that everything is essentially on per unit basis and then just adjust the numbers if necessary. Because for example, if you look at the, let's say the same revenue generated, if we go with the approach that this is on per unit, then what you do is just you create a new column, which would be the total sales, for example, which just multiplies the sales price if we have any additional ones. If not, then price minus the cost times product number of products sold, and just create a new column. So you could use that approach, I would say. All right. Any other questions? How can you explain the distinction between the lead time versus lead time was previously answered. So that's going to be in the dictionary. All right, next one. As a custom visual development company, can you patent the visual you create so that Microsoft cannot create something similar in future, or you need to keep in mind that custom visuals you create today might appear as free visuals from Microsoft in the future? I'm checking to see the full. In the future. Okay, yeah, so it's missing just two words. So as far as I know, but don't quote me on this because I wasn't involved in the patenting process. You can patent certain features of a custom visual, but you cannot patent a custom visual as such. Mainly because unless that visual you create does not have something that's already commonly used, like columns, lines, areas, or anything, it's pretty much impossible to patent a visual as such. You can patent certain features, which are very specific and unique, but you cannot patent a visual as such. That's my understanding. I'm not 100% sure. But if you want, you can send a message to webinars@zoomcharts.com, and I'll ask the team who was actually involved in the process, because I don't want to, kind of quote me on that without me having a full understanding of the whole process. So I could ask them to provide more context into it if you want to. What's the tips and tricks for making a nice dashboard in Power BI? Uh, try, fail, fail, try, try, fail. No, but in all seriousness, I would say playing around with different visuals, playing around with different ideas is one part of it. Looking at initial design and concept of the report is very important. So for that one, you can look at some of the previous webinars where, for example, we had a webinar where Federico talked about how to create templates using Figma, or you can just find templates online with the layouts and everything. Because one of the most important things about every single report is you must understand that there has to be order to things, right? You cannot just randomly throw visuals in whatever place you had available. No, it has to tell a story. Think about having a page in front of you, right? What is the first thing you expect to see on a page? Well, if it's just a random document, I want to understand what this document is. So there's a title. After the title, what comes? The main thing. Usually the main thing is the KPIs. Got it. If next one is the visuals. Okay, turns out I have some navigation. Navigation, do I put it on the side or at the top menu? So think about the order of things. That's the primary thing. And afterwards, purely visual things, it's just the design aspect where you play around with different aspects. So, but yeah, my main tip would be play, fail, fail, play. That's how people learn. All right. Any other questions? I guess not. Hey, we got through all of them. I took extra 3 minutes of your time, so I do apologize for that. But I hope it was interesting, it was insightful, and you managed to learn something new from today. That's the main thing about every single one of these. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing your submissions and going through them and seeing what you decided to do with the data set that we provided to you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate and reach out to us. And from my side, best of luck. All right, everyone, have an amazing day in front of you, and I'll see you in the top 5 announcement. Bye, everyone.